What was the harshest way someone found out they had been fired? A guy worked at an insulation manufacturing plant in western New York where the company began major layoffs. The list of dismissed employees was announced on Friday afternoon. He went home, started figuring out how to apply for unemployment, and updated his resume. Later that same day, they called and said his name had been added to the list by mistake. Everything was supposedly fine, and he should come to work on Monday. He came in, only to be told that there had been no mistake after all. Then they fired him for the second time. My mother used to sort the payroll checks. She knew that a person received 2 separate checks only in one situation, when they were being fired. One day she was sorting the checks and suddenly noticed that she had a second separate check herself. I felt awful for her. She had worked for the company for 15 years, and they treated her terribly. If I ever get fired, I will probably find out in much the same way. I work in shipping and receiving. Termination checks always arrive by FedEx in a thin envelope. The last 2 people who were fired had those envelopes delivered in their managers' names. Once, an envelope arrived addressed to my manager. Luckily for me, they fired my coworker that time. But I know for certain that the next time I see a thin envelope addressed to my manager, it will be for me. My friend arrived at work and found someone else already sitting at her desk. They moved my desk into the hallway behind a structural column. I still would not resign on my own. They fired me the next day. My manager was essentially fired, so I could take his position. It felt awful because I genuinely liked him. A few months later, I received an email from him at his new workplace. He asked whether I might be interested in a position at their company. The money was good. I agreed, gave 2 weeks' notice at my old job, and joined the new company. It was good to see him again. He was a great guy. About 2 years later, however, our company was acquired, and layoffs began one after another. The new owners were simply replacing people with their own staff. Then one day, my manager and his boss, the plant director, walked into my office. The director had a grim, sympathetic expression. He said, "Listen, how are you doing? As you know, since the company changed hands, we have had to let a lot of people go." I automatically started putting my keys into my pocket because I understood where this was going. My old manager stood silently beside him with his head and arms lowered. The director continued, "Unfortunately, the manager who brought you into this job has been fired. That means you will now take over his responsibilities." I felt terrible for it. During the time I knew him, this happened to him twice. He was a wonderful man, just catastrophically unlucky. I was laid off a few months later too, but I will never forget that moment. I was vice president of a car club for 5 years. One day I opened the website to publish something. The banner said, "Meet our new vice president." I still occasionally attend their events, but I do not even speak to them anymore. I worked for a non-profit organization that depended on grants. At one point, we lost our funding. It was unpleasant, of course, but these things happen. The grant organization did not tell us, though. They told the local newspaper. We learned that we were out of money by reading about it in the news. I worked at a bar. One day, I arrived for my shift and found the door locked. In my manager's defense, she had not been told either. Unfortunately, I hear stories like this from restaurants and bars all the time. No warning, just a locked and abandoned business. Our administrator discovered she was being fired because HR accidentally added an event called XYZ Departure to the shared calendar. The way everything happened at Spirit Airlines was particularly harsh. Well, everyone. As of this moment, the company no longer exists, which means your jobs no longer exist either. Then you still have to find a way to buy your own ticket home from work. It was a case like that at the college where I worked. A man was sitting quietly in his office when the college president's secretary suddenly walked in. Without saying anything, she began measuring the windows. He asked what she was doing. She replied, "Measuring them for new curtains." He said, "Oh, I am getting new curtains." She answered, "No, they will not be yours." We arrived at work and found the office doors secured with heavy chains. An official notice from the state was attached to the door. The entire first shift gathered outside. We stood in the parking lot for a while, completely confused, and then simply went home. My manager scheduled a same-day meeting at the airport because they were supposedly just passing through. They specifically insisted that I bring my laptop. So they made you travel to the airport just to fire you there? I have heard of that or something similar. An employee is invited to a lunch meeting at a cafe or restaurant near the airport because some executive is passing through. The employee arrives, sits down at the table, and gets fired. Someone told me about this happening to a guy I did not personally know. I have never experienced it myself. Imagine believing that a senior executive wants to meet you personally. Perhaps you did excellent work or led a team that genuinely earned some attention. You travel there expecting a pleasant one-on-one conversation, a chance to stand out and become more than just a name in a report. Instead, It is hello, goodbye, you are fired. It is cruel, demoralizing, and completely inhuman. Former FBI Director James Comey learned that he had been fired while speaking to employees. One of them simply pointed at a television where the news was already reporting that Trump had dismissed him. There was a woman at our workplace who constantly caused problems. We understood that if she entered the office and was told there that she had been fired, the situation would end with the police being called. To avoid unnecessary trouble, they simply disabled her access badge and met her at the entrance in the morning with her belongings already packed. Unsurprisingly, she somehow got inside the next day anyway, and the police still had to escort her out. I once worked at an ice rink. While I was on vacation, management changed and they fired a large part of the staff. When I returned, I went there to skate. It was free for employees. Another worker, apparently the new manager's son, approached me and asked, "Do you have a ticket?" I said no. He replied, "Then get out. You do not work here anymore." Something similar happened at another ice rink. Once again, I was on vacation. They closed the rink completely and did not tell me because they knew I would make a fuss and involve the local community. They told local residents the rink was closing for repairs, but in reality they removed everything that could be reused. The wife of one manager who knew what was happening forced him to tell me one day before I left, so I at least had time to collect my belongings. In 2008, my entire team was laid off. I was the manager. We had 11 people spread across offices throughout the country. Everyone came to work that day, and we were fired in different offices at 8 in the morning in each office's local time. After the layoffs, they held a company-wide information technology meeting to announce that our team had been outsourced. A woman in the Phoenix conference room said, "Wait, I'm on that team." There was a long silence. "Could you please step into the hallway? Human Resources would like to speak with you." I do not know whether it was the harshest possible method, but it was incredibly disgusting. When I was in culinary school, I worked as a cook at a local country club and was training to become a sous chef. Downstairs, we had a small grill bar with a flat-top grill, one deep fryer, and a microwave. It was very basic, but conveniently located next to the course for the players. On the grill's opening day, we served at least 500 people. Because it was so busy, they assigned a new woman to work beside me. I did not yet realize that I was spending the entire day training the person who would replace me. After a brutal 12-hour shift, my manager said, "Thank you for training your replacement. You are fired." As a teenager, I worked at a nightclub and completed a full Saturday shift until 3 in the morning. Then everyone was gathered on the dance floor and told that the club was closing. It had been our final night, and none of us had jobs anymore. They also told us we would not be paid for that shift. An all-hands meeting was suddenly scheduled for April 1st, 2003. The director announced that our branch was closing. It was not an April Fool's joke. A coworker arrived at the airport at 7 in the morning to fly overseas with his team on a business trip. I had to explain that his ticket had been canceled because he had been fired. Nobody at the office had bothered to tell him. I did not personally know the guy, but still. Once, I was hired very quickly for a new job at a bar. They literally called and asked, "Can you start this weekend?" When I arrived, I learned that the guy I was replacing had been fired only the day before. 2 months later, that same man found a job at another bar, got completely drunk during a shift, and was fired on the spot. The next morning, he woke up and went to work because he did not remember being fired. So they fired him again. I know a salesman who was driving to meet a client when he received a call from another client. The client asked what his plans were now. It turned out that his company had already emailed its clients to say that he no longer worked there. They just had not told him yet that he was fired. I was laid off during my vacation on my birthday. At 5 in the morning, my manager messaged me and said we needed to speak urgently. It turned out that the company had outsourced my department and planned to transfer part of the work to AI. A couple of months ago, I was fired with no warning at all. 4 days before I would have qualified for severance pay, I simply arrived at work as usual. It was a normal day. At the end of the shift, the secretary called me into her office and said I was being fired for no apparent reason. I had worked there for a year, and during that entire time, I had received no complaints, warnings, or feedback of any kind. We were all called into the break room, and they began handing out severance packages right at the entrance. My wife worked for the same company. She had the day off because our son was starting at a new school for the first time. That meant I was the one who had to tell her that both of us had been fired. This happened 1 week after we bought our first house in a new city, 2 hours away from our friends and family. I could not sleep for a week afterward. After that, we never worked at the same place again. We later learned that 2 senior executives had arrived an hour earlier. They escorted our general manager and regional manager out of the building without allowing them to say a word to the employees. For context, I had worked there for a year and a half while my wife had been there for about 6 to 8 months. I was the one who helped her get the job because it had seemed like a good place. At least 2 other married couples worked there, even though the branch had fewer than 50 employees. This happened in the early 2000s. Now I tell my children, you owe an employer nothing except the hours they pay you for. If a better opportunity appears, take it, because they do not care about you.